It is said that a little girl in a red hood once wandered into the woods. But what if the woods did not merely call her? What if they summoned her? You know the story. Well, she wore a red cape, she met a wolf, and tragedy followed. But what if everything you've been told is wrong? What if the wolf is not just a monster, but something far older, something far darker, lurking deep within the bones of humanity? Follow the path, and let it lead you through shadowed forests, forgotten rituals, and ancient fears. Let it show you what really hides behind the wolf's eyes. In the world of fairy tales, few figures are as iconic as Little Red Riding Hood's wolf. A simple, savage beast with a thirst for blood, right? But that story, like so many others, has layers beneath the surface. It's a tale that stretches back long before the Brothers Grimm, and one whose roots intertwine with rituals, symbolism, and fears that reach all the way into the ancient world. So, take a step forward. And as you do, consider this: the wolf in the tale, what does it truly represent? What if it isn't just a creature in the woods, but something far more monstrous, hidden beneath the guise of folklore? And what if this wolf was born from the very nightmares of mankind, an echo of primal, forgotten fears? Let's begin. Once upon a time, though perhaps this is not such a simple story, there was a little girl. She was known as Little Red Riding Hood. Her mother, loving but pragmatic, gave her a bright red cloak, a gift so striking it became her signature. It was said to be made from the finest cloth, dyed so vividly that it seemed to burn with the color of blood. The girl wore it everywhere. It became part of her, a marker of her innocence and youth. On a bright, crisp morning, her mother called to her, "Take this basket of goods to your grandmother's house. The forest is dark and the road is long. Do not stray from the path." Little Red Riding Hood, with a smile like the dawn, promised to be careful. And so she set off, basket in hand, down the winding forest path, singing a little tune, unaware of the danger that waited just beyond the trees. But the forest is not a place for the innocent. Its shadows grow long, and the wind carries secrets that speak of things darker than the eye can see. Before long, Little Red Riding Hood was approached by a wolf, its fur dark as night, eyes gleaming with an unsettling intelligence. The girl, though she was warned by her mother, did not fear the wolf. How could she? He spoke kindly to her, as though he were a friend. His voice, smooth like velvet, invited her to pause, to linger. "Where are you going, my dear?" he asked, his words almost melodic. "To her grandmother's house," she replied. The wolf, sensing an opportunity, suggested she take the longer path through the woods to enjoy the beauty of the trees and flowers. But the shorter path, the path the girl had been instructed to take, was far more direct. Yet the wolf's words were persuasive, and so, with a shrug, the little girl veered off the well-worn road, down the winding path he had pointed to. As she walked, unaware of the wolf's true intentions, he made his way to her grandmother's house, reaching it first. There, with terrifying swiftness, he tricked the old woman, devoured her whole, and disguised himself in her clothes, lying in wait. When Little Red Riding Hood arrived, she noticed something was wrong. The house was quiet. She entered, and there in the bed lay her grandmother, though something about her seemed strange. "Oh, grandmother, what big eyes you have," she exclaimed, stepping closer. "The better to see you with, my dear," the wolf replied, his voice barely a whisper. "And what big ears you have, the better to hear you with, my dear, and what big teeth you have, the better to eat you with." With that, the wolf lunged. The end came swiftly, but not before Little Red Riding Hood realized too late that the figure she had trusted was never her grandmother at all. The wolf's jaws closed around her, and the story ends. Or rather, it was supposed to. But something is missing from this story. Something primal, something ancient that pulses beneath its surface. The tale of Little Red Riding Hood has taken many forms over the centuries. But if we look closely, we can trace its origins back to much older, more unsettling stories buried deep in the collective memory of humanity. The most familiar version of the tale, the one passed down by the brothers Grimm, is but a faint echo of the original, a sanitization for children, with the blood and terror carefully diluted. But even their version was already far removed from the first whispers of the story. The earliest known iteration of Little Red Riding Hood comes from France, where it appeared as Le Petit Chaperon Rouge in the 17th century, penned by the French writer Charles Perrault. In Perrault's version, the story is brief and pointed, with Little Red Riding Hood not surviving the encounter. There is no rescue, no huntsman rushing to the rescue. The moral of the tale is clear: little girls should be wary of wolves, but also do not stray from the path. It is simple, and in its simplicity, chilling. But even before Perrault, Chaperon Rouge was known in oral tradition across Europe, morphing with each retelling, taking new forms depending on region, culture, and era. The tale can be found as far back as the 10th century in some of the earliest versions of folk narrative from the French and Germanic regions, though its origins are clouded in mystery. One of the most interesting versions of the tale comes from Italy, in the story La Finestra e la Lupa, The Window and the Wolf. Here, the wolf is not a mere creature, but a shape-shifting demon, a force of nature more terrifying than any beast. The tale begins similarly: an innocent girl is sent into the woods, but the wolf is not just a monster waiting to devour her. It is a manifestation of a darker, older fear, the wolf as an agent of death, as an incarnation of fate itself. The theme of the wolf as something beyond a mere predator appears even earlier in ancient texts. In the Metamorphoses by Ovid, we find tales of gods and mortals transformed into wolves, cursed by their own desires or by the whims of fate. In these early stories, the wolf was not just an animal, but a symbol of divine retribution, punishment, or the loss of humanity. And it is here, in these primal tales, that we begin to see the first glimmers of what the wolf truly represents. It is not a mindless killer, but a figure born of myth and ritual. A creature that crosses the line between man and beast, nature and the supernatural. It is a shadow that has haunted humanity for millennia. In the medieval period, the fear of wolves grew more intense, and the mythos surrounding them deepened. Wolves were not only physical threats to livestock and children, they became the embodiment of chaos itself. Entire communities in France, Germany, and the Slavic nations were terrorized by reports of werewolves, individuals believed to be cursed, transformed into wolves under the moon's gaze. By the 16th century, during the height of the witch hunts, the figure of the wolf as a symbol of evil was further solidified. Wolves were often believed to be in league with witches, demons, and the devil himself, and they played an essential part in the folklore surrounding paganism and forbidden rites. To encounter a wolf was to come face to face with a manifestation of the wild, untamable forces of nature, of the ancient world before civilization tamed them. But these wolves were not just beasts. They were messengers of fate, harbingers of the unknown, of what lies just beyond the veil of the safe, familiar world. They were as ancient as the forests they prowled, as old as the fear that stirred in human hearts when the dark was too deep to navigate alone. So, what of this red-hooded girl? Who is she really, and why is she walking into the forest, the very realm of the untamed and wild? Was she simply a naive child, or is she, too, part of something much older? A representation of innocence lost, of a rite of passage that is as dangerous as it is inevitable. Perhaps the answer lies not in the characters, but in the path itself, the path that Little Red Riding Hood strays from. What does this journey into the woods truly signify? Let us pause for a moment and consider the deeper currents beneath the tale of Little Red Riding Hood, currents that stretch far beyond a simple girl and a wolf. At the heart of this story is the image of the path. The path she must follow, the path she strays from. In many ways, the path is the true antagonist of the tale, an unyielding boundary, a line between civilization and chaos, between innocence and corruption. The red cloak, too, holds meaning. It is no mere garment. The color red from the dawn of myth has been a symbol of life and death, of birth and blood. In many ancient traditions, red is the color of initiation, of rites of passage into adulthood, of the sacrifice required to step into a new realm of experience. But it is also the color of danger, of warning. The blood-red moon, the crimson river, these are not symbols of safety, but of the irrevocable crossing of a threshold. What is the significance of the wolf in this tale? Not just a beast, but a predator. It is not mere hunger that drives him, it is something deeper. Something ancient. Across many cultures, wolves have long been associated with the psychopompa guide of souls between worlds. They walk the edge of life and death. In Greek mythology, the god Hades, ruler of the underworld, was often accompanied by dogs or wolves, symbols of the journey into the afterlife. In Norse myth, the wolf Fenrir was the embodiment of chaos and destruction, the son of Loki destined to bring about Ragnarok, the end of the world. The wolf's connection to death and transformation is clear. But what is it that the wolf in Little Red Riding Hood seeks? Does he merely seek flesh, or is he hunting something deeper, the innocence of youth, the passage of a soul from childhood into the dark, uncertain waters of adulthood? Consider this: the wolf, in many versions of the tale, devours the grandmother, an old woman, a symbol of wisdom, life lived. He then disguises himself in her clothing, waiting to consume the girl. The wolf's role is not just to feast on flesh, but to devour the very essence of what the grandmother represents, the passage of time, the loss of innocence. The wolf, in essence, consumes the sacred connection between generations. In this way, the tale is not just about a little girl and a wolf, but about the brutal transformation of life itself. The wolf is not merely a force of nature. He is the force of fate. He is time. The familiar imagery of the wolf and the girl also taps into archetypes older than the written word. Little Red Riding Hood can be seen as the archetypal maiden, a symbol of youth on the cusp of womanhood. In Jungian psychology, the maiden is the first stage in the journey of individuation, the process of self-realization. The maiden's innocence is a state of unawareness, but as she walks into the woods, this innocence will be tested. In contrast, the wolf represents the shadow, the darker side of the psyche, the part that lies dormant until it is awakened. It is an expression of the unconscious, a force that must be confronted. In the mythic world, the shadow is not inherently evil, but it is dangerous because it represents everything we do not wish to face about ourselves. The ancient Greeks told tales of the Lupa, a she-wolf that nursed Romulus and Remus, the twin founders of Rome. Wolves, in this sense, were also symbols of nurturance of the primal forces that sustain life, even as they threaten it. The wolf is, in a sense, a creature that embodies both life and death. And so we ask, what is it that the wolf seeks in Little Red Riding Hood? Is it her blood, or is it something more elusive, her very soul, her transformation into womanhood? Is this a coming-of-age story, in which the girl must lose something precious in order to enter a new phase of life? Perhaps the wolf is not simply the antagonist, but a necessary force, one that initiates the girl into the darker realms of existence. Without the wolf, there would be no transformation, no shedding of innocence, no crossing into the unknown. To truly understand the significance of the wolf in Little Red Riding Hood, we must stretch our gaze even further back to a time before even the earliest written stories. We must reach into the depths of deep time, into the primordial world where myths were not just stories, but the very fabric of existence. The ancient Indo-European tribes, who first settled in what we now call Europe, shared a deep reverence and fear of wolves. These early peoples understood the wolf as a symbol of the wild, of the untamed forces of nature that bordered the known and the unknown. In their cosmology, wolves were not just predators, but embodiments of chaos and transformation. They existed at the edge of civilization, where the rules of the human world no longer applied. But wolves were more than mere symbols of disorder. They were also tied to the concept of sacred boundaries. In early European myth, wolves were often seen as guardians of sacred places, forests, burial mounds, and even the threshold between life and death. These were places where the veil between the worlds was thin, where the dead might wander and the living might encounter spirits. In the Vedas, the ancient texts of the Indo-Aryan peoples, wolves are often associated with disease and plague. The idea here is not simply that wolves bring death, but that they are harbingers of death. In these texts, wolves are the beasts that roam on the periphery of civilization, lurking at the edges of human society, reminding us that life is fragile. That death is always waiting just beyond the horizon. Across cultures, wolves were also seen as the ultimate shapeshifters. The idea of a man transforming into a wolf, or a wolf into a man, appears in myths from Sumer to Scandinavia. In ancient Sumerian myth, there are stories of werewolves people cursed to live as wolves by the gods. These creatures were not simply monsters, but figures caught in the space between the human and the divine, constantly shifting between realms. The earliest mythic transformations of wolves were not just about shape-shifting, but about crossing boundaries, moving from the realm of the living to the realm of the dead. From civilization to wilderness, from childhood to adulthood. The wolf was both a guide and a trickster, teaching the initiate the difficult lesson of the transition from one stage of life to another. In Greek mythology, we see a similar reverence for the wolf as a symbol of fate. The Lupa, the she-wolf who nurtured the founders of Rome, was not just an animal, she was a divine creature that protected and guided the twins. But there is another side to this. The she-wolf was also the bringer of change, a creature that would devour what was no longer needed and make space for something new. It is no wonder that in Roman rituals, the wolf played a role in the sacred rites of transition, marking the passage from one stage of life to another, from boyhood to manhood. And so, too, do we find echoes of these rituals in the folk traditions surrounding Little Red Riding Hood. The wolf, as an archetype, represents that same threshold, the point at which innocence and experience collide. It is in the wolf-esque gaze that we see reflected all the dangers of stepping into the unknown. The deeper we look, the more we begin to see the wolf not as a singular creature, but as a symbolic archetype, a figure that connects disparate cultures, disparate times. He is not merely a part of one story, but a force that has haunted the human psyche for thousands of years. From the ancient Greeks to the Sumerians, from the Norse to the Slavic peoples, the wolf is a constant presence, woven into the very fabric of myth. This is not mere superstition. Recent folklore research has shown that myths like Little Red Riding Hood are not just the products of isolated cultures, they are part of a phylogenetic web of interconnected tales evolving and adapting over time, but all stemming from the same deep human need to understand the primal forces of life and death. This is why the wolf is not just a monster, but a key figure in a global understanding of the transition between worlds, between childhood and adulthood, between life and death, between the known and the unknown. The persistence of these stories passed down through oral traditions woven into religious rites. And recorded in literature shows that the fear and fascination with wolves have been integral to human civilization for millennia. This fear, this reverence, runs deeper than simple folklore. It is an echo of something universal, an ancient memory of the wild, untamable forces that once threatened to overwhelm humanity. The tale of Little Red Riding Hood is not merely a child's bedtime story. It is a ritual, a journey, a crossing of the boundary between the safety of civilization and the terror of the unknown. And at the heart of that terror is the wolf. Now, take a moment to think back on that familiar tale of Little Red Riding Hood. The wolf, the cloak, the forest. But something has shifted, hasn't it? The story, once so simple, has transformed into something much more profound, something older, more primal. The wolf is no longer just a hungry beast. He is a force of nature, a guardian of the threshold between innocence and experience, between childhood and the dark, twisted path of adulthood. He is a creature that does not merely hunt the girl, but seeks her transformation, the path she strays from. It is the very path of her own evolution, a journey that she must undertake to survive the deeper truths of life. But what about the girl? The red-hooded maiden, so innocent and unaware at the beginning of the story, is she not also us? Each of us, in our own lives, must inevitably stray from the path, must walk into the woods to face the wolves that haunt us. In the end, Little Red Riding Hood's fate is not just about the wolf. It is about the passage through darkness, through danger, through the unknown. Her innocence is shattered not by the wolf's claws, but by the realization that the world is far more complicated, far more treacherous than she could have imagined. So we ask, is it truly the wolf that must be defeated, or is it the terror of facing the wild? Untamable aspects of life itself. The wolf is not just the monster at the end of the path, he is the very shadow we must confront within ourselves. Without the wolf, there can be no transformation. Without the shadow, there can be no light. Perhaps, like Little Red Riding Hood, we must all walk into the woods. We must all face the wolves that live there, whether they come as creatures of fur and teeth, or as the hidden fears that lurk in our own hearts. And so, as you stand at the edge of the forest, ready to walk into the dark, ask yourself, what is your red cloak? What path will you follow? For the wolves are always there, waiting, and if you choose to enter, you may find that their eyes are not so different from your own. Next time, we will follow another path, a different story. Another shadow, join us. And perhaps you'll discover that some legends are far older than you think. Until then, remember, the forest is always watching.